Next, my dear friends, we have another lecture, a talk, and this is going to be conducted by Ruth Diggins from New Zealand, and she has chosen a very interesting topic. The topic of her discussion will be emotional composting, transforming everyday life through yoga therapy. So this is going to be the topic for today. Ruth is a Viniyoga teacher trainer and Viniyoga therapist based in a place near Wellington, New Zealand. And she's a long-term student of the tradition. We met, I think, in the year 2003, the same year my daughter was born, long time ago. And Ruth is very inspirational mentor to many people in New Zealand and helps them to process and overcome their traumas through yoga therapy. And she is regularly runs teacher training also in her place called Raumati South. And there she is. So she is going to do the next presentation. And incidentally, Ruth was also one of the three people who were there with me together on the last moments of my father's death. So thank you, Ruth, for being there. Namaste. And up to you now, Ruth. Take charge.
Thank you, Kausthub. So I will start with a greeting in our Indigenous tongue in Maori. Tēnā koutou katoa, nā mihi nui kia koutou, e nā mana, e nā reo, e nā ho I whā. No mai haere mai, ki tēnei hui. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So I'm saying hello to all of you and sending thanks to Kausthub for organising this. And I've really been enjoying listening to other people. So I'm a bit more earthy. So I'm going to start with a story about Sir and I. And I think this might have been around 2007 when I was new in Sangha. So Kausthub was running this international group and we were learning together, going to Chennai every year for about a month. And a lot of the Sangha had been together as a group already, and they'd been studying and learning how to chant, which I was terrible at. And I felt like a real newbie, so I was hiding down the back and just soaking it all up. And Sir was teaching us a few classes a day. And this particular week, he was teaching us mudras, and Sir wouldn't just talk about them, he would give us an experience. So he would give us the theory and get us to do the experience and then talk about it. And there were a couple of students there who were mums with babies. And I was a mum. I'd left my boys at home with their dad, and the boys are about 7 and 8, I think then. And so it really impacted me watching these women be in class with their children. And so one day I offered to look after one of the women's babies while she actually had the experience of doing the mudra without trying to look after her child at the same time. And went really well. Her little boy really liked me. She had a great experience. But afterwards, that afternoon, Sir approached me and he gave me a really large, beautiful, ripe papaya. And I felt very embarrassed. I think partly because I was hiding down the back, partly because I didn't look after that woman's child to be noticed. And he said very carefully that it was kind of me to do that, to have looked after her child, and not to do it again. He was very clear that I was not to do it again. It was a very large, beautiful papaya. One of Sue's favourite fruits was papaya, and he was really good at choosing them. So it was ready to eat. And I didn't want to waste it. And I didn't think that I could eat it all by myself. So I cut it in half and I shared it out with Sangha for afternoon tea. And Sue came up to me again and very quietly said, "That papaya was for you." So my experience with Sue was that he had a very specific teaching method of really seeing the person and teaching them directly, not always with a so-called yoga practice. So my experience of Desikachar and his son is that they teach in action. And this teaching moment has stayed with me my whole life, and I still contemplate it. So also at that time, we were learning about yoga as it was talked about in the Bhagavad Gita. And when we got to the bit where it talked about not being attached to the fruits of your action, well, that felt very personal to me. And I've contemplated that idea about putting all your effort into your action and not worrying about the fruits of your action. That you can't always control the fruit that comes out of your action, and that you might have a small amount of control over your own action. Well, small amount of control here. It also relates for me to Kriya Yoga, that idea of tapas, svajaya, and ishvara pranidhanani. So I've reflected on this concept of the yoga of action and focusing on the quality of my actions and not worrying about the fruit of my actions ever since then. Now we're doing a segue. I have an agricultural science degree, and in my past life, I used to work on farms and for the Ministry of Agriculture. I have become more interested in regenerative agriculture and in home gardening in a regenerative way. I grew up with my parents and grandparents gardening. Most of our vegetables in my large family of 6 children came from our garden. But none of my family gardeners made compost. They would buy in ingredients like fertilizer to make the plants grow. And it seemed to me that each year they needed to buy in more stuff to make the veggies grow. It was the same at university. Growing grass was about applying the right fertilizer in the right amount, usually increasing every year, at the right time. And then I discovered regenerative gardening, where the emphasis is on the soil, on Papatuanuku, on the Mother Earth, the ground from which the fruits can grow. In this discovery, a recovery of ancient knowledge of good gardening happened to me at the same time as I discovered and practiced in this lineage. So I see yoga through my regenerative gardener's lenses. In this organic way of gardening, we work with the garden that we have, with the soil that we have, in my case, very sandy, in our climate and our seasons. And we seek to understand its wholeness. We put most of our efforts into the soil by making compost and feeding all the microorganisms. This means that I practice each day as a gardener tends their garden each day, with curiosity and kindness, so that I notice in my garden and myself what weeds grow in what circumstances, what plants grow best in my garden, not the ones that are in the beautiful pictures in the magazines, but what actually grows well in my garden. What are the true expressions of my inner self, in my family, in my community, where I live? Yoga has given me a framework to understand and comprehend when my actions resonate with my spiritual being, with my inner light, or as Vidi said, my authentic self, and Kate too. So these are the yamas. And this is how I understand them. When I act with ahimsa, non-harming, I act with the comprehension that I could cause harm. And when I align with my spiritual being, harm is less likely to occur to myself. When I act with satyam, truthfulness, I act with courage to communicate my reality, my truth, how I see things, so that you can come to know my real self. And that takes courage. When I act with asteya, with my intention not to steal, I act from the awareness and the knowledge of myself in those times when I might be tempted to steal, not just things, but people's time, energy, attention, even their perception of me. When I act with the quality of brahmacharya, I bring that quality of expansiveness to all my relationships. When I act with aparigraha, the action of not grasping, I do so by becoming aware of my tendencies to grasp at things, people, experiences, and by aligning with, resonating with my inner light, connecting to my deeper self, I am able to let go and not grasp, to hang on to external things due to my deeper internal connection, my shraddha. And it's through this practice, abhyasa in the Yoga Sutras, that I figure out what I need to let go of, vairagyam, just like Vidi was talking about. I believe that we are whole, just as we are, that we are spirits living a physical human life, and that we can become disconnected from our light, our spirit, through experiences that we do not know how to process, or in my gardener talk, that we do not know how to compost. And that maybe our families do not know how to compost or have forgotten how to compost. Yoga to me is a way to process our experiences. I'm going to get a bit earthy now. Our shit, and turn it into valuable building blocks for our gardens, compost for our fruitful selves. So my husband Alistair said that I needed to tell you more about what I mean by shit. I mean all the byproducts of our experiences, the undigested residue of all that we consume with all of our 11 senses. The stinky, sticky stuff that we want to deposit in the water and flush away and not deal with because it's stinky. But it's sticky, so it stays. The knots and grunties that we carry inside us, the mixed up emotions and thoughts and beliefs that we carry around without questioning, or like Vidi's student, without even knowing that they're there. Yoga to me is a process which, like gardening, gardening again, takes time and space. It is a process to consciously connect with who we really are, a pathway to reconnect with our light, our spirit, or if you prefer, our authentic self. Much like regenerative gardening, yoga encourages us to stop looking outward for the answers, to stop applying outside fertilizers, and to start making our own. To do this, we have to find ways to come home to our garden, to be in our garden just as it is, to accept that we've got stuff that we could compost, and to not be in other people's business, because then we aren't home. If we're in someone else's business, we're not home. We can't do our composting. And yes, there are weeds and traumas that appear in our garden. And yes, these might require the benefit of outside support to get rid of. External consultants might visit to help us recognize certain pests and diseases, to help us question our thoughts and beliefs that no longer serve us, to help us even find those underlying thoughts and beliefs that lead to those emotions that no longer serve us, that lead to those emotions that cause us to suffer. These consultants might help us create rituals so that we can handle the traumas, perhaps burn them and use the ashes in our garden. As an external consultant who is invited into others' gardens, I think it is important for me to always remember that it's not me that heals someone. My role is to come with a kete, a basket of tools that might help the composting process. My role is to connect from the light in my heart to the light in theirs. My role is to always remember that their garden is whole. My role is to be unafraid of looking at the unprocessed, uncomposted gubbins. That's a real word, you can look it up. Because I look at and process my stuff every day when I practice. Just like gardening, yoga is not a once-er. It's something that we need to do every day. Seasons to our practice too. Some seasons it looks like nothing is happening when we allow the earth to rest, a fallow time. But much can be happening below the surface. This helps me to remember to keep practicing even when I feel like I am not receiving any fruits or vegetables for my practice. I can only provide the elements that the garden needs. I do not grow the plants. The change in the student is in their time. So, what tools are useful? As a gardener and a yoga practitioner, it is important to remember we are not expected to do this all on our own. In yoga, a teacher and a sangha are important. You can benefit from others' experiences and support. Sometimes you can even have a garden working bee. So that's when a whole lot of friends come around to your garden and help you out with all those jobs that just feel too big to do on your own. But our daily practice is on our own. It might take a lot of steps to get to that place where we feel able to do our own daily practice. You might need to go to a group class for weeks, months, maybe even years before you are ready for a personal practice. I've had students that have come to a group class every week for 10 years before they were ready for a personal practice. It has to be in their time when they're ready. It's not my time. Your personal practice might not look like what you think a yoga practice should be. Like Vidi was saying, it might start as a change in life, a change in your lifestyle, going for a walk, going to visit a wise counselor, a wise person in your community. It might be journaling. It might be allowing yourself to be creative, to draw, to paint, to write that poetry. It might be noticing your shoulds. It might be developing your gratitude, writing in a gratitude journal. It might be going for a massage once a week. What I love about yoga is its individuality, its ability to meet a person right to where they are, to start there with a step that they can sustain, a step that they are interested in taking. So in composting, you gather your ingredients and then you assemble them into a pile in such a way as to encourage heating. As the pile processes, the heat increases and then falls away. This is like tapas in Kriya Yoga. At that point in the composting, you need to study the heap to see if it needs adding to. Maybe some water, maybe some shelter from water in New Zealand, maybe some turning of the pile. This is svadhyaya in Kriya Yoga. And then you have to leave it alone. You have to hand it over and let the process happen. Ishvara pranidhana ni. It takes time to turn that compost pile into humus, which is gold dust for your garden. For me, yoga therapy is co-creating the right composting process for the gubbins that the student discovers. Not what I think they should be working on, not what I can see, but what the student discovers. So for this, I use the Kriya Yoga framework. I think about the tapas. What are the ingredients that the student has to hand? And what is the best heating method for the student in their situation? How can we assemble the ingredients to allow the heating process to begin? Svadhyaya support the student in their self-study of the process and the outcome? Have we chosen the right tools? Is the assembly method right? Is there something we need to change? We can go back and try another way. Ishvara Pranidhana Ni. Working out the way to keep the best bits for the student and let go of the rest. So tapas in a practice might be doing a simple breath and movement practice to notice your breath, to allow the prana to flow. The svadhyaya might be noticing your breath off the mat. When does it change? What affects your breath? What clues does it give you about what you need to work with? Ishvara Pranidhana Ni, is this helping to connect with yourself, your deeper self, your light, your spirit, or your authentic self? Can you keep that contact? Or do you need to compost more? So is tapas the next step? Or the tapas might be that you change your diet. The svajaya, that you notice the effect, that you notice when you can and when you can't sustain the change. What are the thoughts, the beliefs, the emotions that are going on? Ishvara Pranidhana Ni, finding ways that you can hand it over, that you can ask for help. Tapas might be doing a releasing ritual, e.g. a whakawetiweti. So this is an indigenous Maori concept introduced to me by my kaumatua, Wiremu Niania. Wiremu is also the Maori elder who supports all of our trainings here in New Zealand, especially lately when Kausthub hasn't been able to get here. So in a whakawetiweti, we write down all the hurt and anguish, and we keep writing until it's all down on paper. We externalize the internal. It might be writing, it might be painting, it might be drawing. You just keep going. It might be over days, weeks, months, for some people even over years, to externalize that hurt and anguish. The svajaya is noticed to feel ready to do the releasing ritual. Ishvara Pranidhana Ni is the process of, usually in this ritual, it's burning the writing and offering it through the smoke to the divine or the ancestors to look after, or collecting the ashes and offering it to the water, to the ancestors, back to the earth, or even to dig a hole and bury the ashes, focusing on letting go, handing over. Another tapas might be doing your practice every day. The svajaya, noticing the effect. With ahimsa, noticing when you can't practice and what might be going on for you when you can't practice. Ishvara Pranidhana Ni, asking for help, talking about it with your teacher, asking for help from your ancestors, the divine, keeping the knowledge, handing over the rest, and then having another go. All the tools of yoga, the 8 limbs, rituals, going on pilgrimages, chanting, all of them have as their function the ability to reconnect us with our light, our spiritual self. For some, this doorway to connection is through the body, linking breath with simple or complex movements. Developing our connection with our body and breath can get us in touch with the knots and grunties we hold in our body. With complex trauma, this may not be the correct first step. An important thing to remember is that yoga is predicated on the relationship between the teacher and the student, just like Vidi was talking about, and Kate. So remember to locate the knowing in the student, and together you will discover their way. So that's my understanding about yoga and composting. And now I would like to finish up with a chant. Kausthub, I have no idea what time it is.
My dear, you have at least another 15 minutes.
Oh, well, we'll have to have some questions. So you guys out there, get on to the questions. So now I'm going to finish up with a chant just for Kausthub, because he loves my chanting so much. And there's a little story behind this chant. So I'm going to do a chant in Maori. You know that Sir had a ship to New Zealand. You know about the story about the New Zealand woman who Desikachar saw greet his father, who really piqued Desikachar's interest in yoga and changed the direction of his life. Desikachar visited New Zealand and met some Maori elders, and he seemed to really enjoy the Maori language. And every time I came to Sangha, Desikachar would want me to teach the group a waiata, not Kausthub. He didn't want me to sing in front of people, but Desikachar was very keen on it. We even learnt the haka together and did that for Desikachar on one of his birthdays. Do you remember, Kausthub?
Yes, of course.
And so every year I would come to Sangha with a waiata. And this waiata that I'd like to do for you now is one of Sir's favourites. And it's talking about the divine and its qualities and how we can connect with that. How we can connect through linking with water in our mountains and the functions of the Creator. Okay, so close your ears, Kausthub. I'm going to chant now. Ko koe o matua te kore, ko koe o te ora, ko koe o te pukenga, te kaihanga o nā mea katoa. Ko koe te toka, te monga te te, ko koe I o. Ko koe I o. Ko koe I o. You survived, Kausthub?
I am still here. Your chanting in the Maori is not that bad. We can manage.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Anyway, Ruth, there is one question that has been asked by one of the participants called Kasturi. She's asking, do we have to control all our emotions, or should we allow it to flow in its own way?
Good question. It depends on the emotion, yeah? So what I've learned is our emotions come from a thought. So something happens to us and we have a thought or a belief about that, and then the emotion flows. And sometimes those thoughts and beliefs produce emotions that make us suffer. And sometimes we're not aware of what the thought is. The emotion just comes and overtakes us. And working with a teacher, working with the practices, maybe can help us slowly become aware of what is it that brings that emotion. What happens before the emotion? What is the thought, the underlying thought or the belief that doesn't feel true to us and causes that contraction, that emotion that doesn't feel good to flow through us?
And what would you do with some of the emotions that are not coming from a thought, because it's not a cognitive thought, but it's something more subconscious, or maybe something that is connected with our ancestry that we inherit? What would you do with those kind of emotions where we have no idea where it's coming from?
Yeah. So you still need to be with that. You don't need to know where it's coming from. So in a garden, sometimes these weeds just appear out of nowhere. So we could sit down in front of the weed and berate it and say it shouldn't be there. Or we can pluck it out and put it in the pile to be composted and focus on the plants that we do want to grow. So it's not about suppressing it. It's there and it's growing, but we're not choosing to water it either. We don't want that weed in our garden. So we can have processes whereby we recognize that weed, we pluck it out, and we compost it. It's not wasted. It's part of us, part of our garden, but we can use it to grow the fruits and vegetables that we know are good for us. That was pretty good, staying with the gardening metaphor, wasn't it?
Yes. And
what do you think, Kausthub?
I thought it was our turn to ask you questions.
Hey, I can't see you, but I can still ask you questions.
You can't see me. There you go. Can you see me now?
Yeah, I can see you now.
So what do I think about it? Actually, I'm not a great composter, as you know, because I'm not so much into the gardening. I see my mother do a lot of the things. And what I do think about it is, what is very, very fascinating is that when we are doing the composting, we are basically putting everything into the bin, whether it's something that we are loving, like, for example, the mangoes that we have not yet finished, or some waste, or some other things that we think are rubbish or whatever. And what is so fascinating is that by some miracle, all of them, when they come together, they somehow transform to become something very useful for the garden. And in the same metaphoric way, which is what I try to remind myself and also my students, is that it's not that only positive emotions are useful for us. I mean, we got to have all the different kinds of emotions and experiences we have in our life. We just put it in that compost box for some time. I mean, And we don't know how they will come together and become nourishment for our life one way or the other. And sometimes we only realize that much later after it has given fruit. So this is what is very important. So this is my 2 cents to that topic.
And sometimes those weeds, you know, like dock, for instance, that's growing in, I think it's a terrible weed, but its roots go down super, super deep.
Yeah.
And it brings up from the deep the nutrients that the other plants need that they can't get to.
Exactly.
And that, I mean, that's that whole thing about us thinking that this is good and this is bad.
Yeah. And I think what humanity has started to do in modern time is we kind of become arrogant. We think we are only entitled for comfortable and positive experiences, and all that bad things should never ever happen. That's part of the problem as well.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem as well.
You have to get your hands dirty and it has to be smelly, otherwise it doesn't grow good vegetables. That's what me and Menaka know.
Excellent. Ruth, just time for one last question because we have to start the next one in about 5 minutes. Vidhi is asking you, accepting that you may have dysfunctional core beliefs is very difficult. How do you compost such core beliefs?
Slowly. Very slowly. I think another thing these days is people, there's a slow movement. Yeah, there's slow cooking movement. There's slow gardening movements. But people still want their therapy to be fast. There's lots of really fast therapies. And I'd really think that some things just take time. Absolutely. And as a therapist, you have to be super patient.
And it's interesting that also in this connection to note where these core beliefs are coming from, because it could just be some kind of brainwashing, or is it based on fact? That's very, very important. That's based on the truth, let's put it that way, based on what is true. That's very, very important, because some people, for example, people who suffer from body image disorders, they have a very deep belief that they are looking ugly, but it may not be the truth. And, but they have this core belief, and this is absolutely wrong. Similarly, some people may have certain belief about certain things, like yoga is evil. Some people think that yoga is evil because it doesn't sit with their religion or what their religious teachers are teaching. So sometimes we got to understand where these things are coming from as well. And
not start with the core beliefs. You have to start with the small steps that you can sustain that build the Shraddha, like, you know, what Deb was talking about. Absolutely.
Good. So let us stop here, Ruth. Thank you so much, and for sharing your experience, and most importantly, thank you for your wonderful, wonderful Maori chanting. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kausthub. Namaste.
Thank you for being today and inspiring many, many of us. Thank you, Ruth.